Hello, and thank you for joining me for today's TARGETjobs webinar on Coding 101, How to Build Coding Skills. I'm Rachel, and I'm the editor of the Science, Engineering and IT sections of TARGETjobs. And today I'm joined by two panellists who are going to help me talk about coding skills, what employers look for, and how these two recommend you build your experience and skills. You will have a chance to ask your own questions to the panel at the end of the session. So if you do have a question, if you pop it in the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen, we'll get through as many as we can, but we probably won't get through them all. So if you do see a question that you do want, that someone's put forward already and you want answering, if you just upvote that question, because that will help us see which are the most popular questions to be asked. Try to keep your questions broad for us, just so that they're applicable to as many people as possible, and we can help you all start with your coding skills nicely. But before we start talking coding, I just want to say a big thank you to both of our panellists for joining us this afternoon. And I'd just like to ask them both to introduce themselves a little bit more. So we have Charlie Bray, a Principal Modelling Engineer at ARM, and Emily Hall, an Associate Technical Analyst at Sky. So Emily, could I ask you to go first and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, my name is Emily Hall. I haven't been at Sky for very long, but I joined through the graduate process. I studied maths at university, and I joined as a software developer. So my coding skills, basically, which is what we're here to talk about today. I'm now a technical analyst, which is slightly more business focused. I still do a lot of coding in my spare time though. I still work on my own personal programming projects. I'm entirely self-taught in terms of coding. Some education on the job, but nothing beforehand. And yeah, that's kind of where I am at the moment.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Emily. And how about you, Charlie?
So my name is Charlie Bray. I'm a principal modelling engineer. So I lead a team of about 12, maybe 14 engineers as of yesterday, because we had a couple of people starting over in ARM. Now, you might have heard of ARM. We do make processors. It's a very good chance you are holding something that we've designed. We are in 18 billion devices every year, so chances are you have many things that we've had our hands in. So as to what a modeling engineer does, we create the designs way before we actually create the actual hardware. So we want to know in advance, many years in advance. Currently, we're looking at things that you'll be using in 2026. How will they perform? Whether the architects have good ideas, whether these are things that work well together, or there's fundamental flaws in them. So in that respect, it's a lot of software engineering. It's you might think of ARM as a hardware company. 3/4 of our engineers are software engineers, and it's a really, really valuable skill to have across the board, whether you are doing front-end design of debuggers or whether you are doing microprocessor design. It is a very, very vital skill.
Perfect. Thank you both for introducing yourselves. So I guess building on that a little bit more, I just wanted to ask for a little bit more on what you do in your job and how coding comes into play for you. Or Emily, you might want to talk about both roles that you've had and how coding came into them, if you don't mind going first again.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to go first. You'll struggle to end me up otherwise. But I'm currently a technical analyst. So the coding that I do is less intense. I don't do as much coding in my day-to-day job anymore. I'm mostly doing sort of config things, a little bit more DevOps type stuff for supporting our services and applications. But I was a software developer for a while, so I would spend my days working on my company. So at Sky, we try and work in an agile fashion, which I'm sure if anyone's ever looked into sort of technical companies, sort of technology industry, then agile is a word which is brandished around a lot. And Scrum and Kanban, sort of the different frameworks that we have. And so we spent, as a software developer, you spend a lot of time working on what we like sort of tickets, i.e. like chunks of work, and building out services and applications. We did a lot of microservice architecture. So effectively breaking down big requests and big pieces of work into individual services, so that functionality is separated between components. And yeah, that's it's coding is a very big skill for a software developer. It's kind of, but it's also not the only thing that software developers do, and it's very easy to forget that. There's a lot more around sort of testing, the supporting of coding, the sort of DevOps, so deployment, continuous integration, and that sort of thing. But as a technical analyst now, yeah, I do sort of a little bit less coding, but I still kind of have my finger in the pie, as it were.
Perfect. And Charlie, how about you? Could you tell us a little bit more about what you do in your job and how coding comes into play for you?
Okay, so all of my team do programming, but let me just start at the very beginning. When I joined the company, which is about 10 years ago, I came in as a software engineer, and the kind of work that we do is, with all software engineering roles, you have two aspects to it. There's the soft programming itself, and there's actually understanding the problem itself. So it's very easy to say, like, oh, it's just a software engineer, you can do anything you want. Actually, without understanding the problem itself, whether it's processor design and making sure the instruction set is correct, and doing emulators or compilers or graphics drivers, things like that, unless you can understand the problem, you're not going to become a very good software developer. In that respect, what we did was you start specializing. You start becoming an expert in an area, and that makes you much stronger software engineer. So that's exactly what I did, is to become a specialist in modeling. And once we have ideas, you can propose them forward to say, look, we would like to have interfaces between models so the models can work together. So currently, similar to Emily, I actually don't spend that much time in software engineering because I have a team to do a lot of that for me. But what I do spend a lot of time on is defining APIs, defining the interfaces, getting the requirements from the other teams, making sure that the things that we produce are easy to work with, are beneficial. And it comes with quite a lot of experience. You can see the pitfalls of software strategies that you're applying. So in that respect, it's a very vital skill. Even though I don't use it on a day-to-day basis, I only will be spending about 1 day a week actually doing coding. But without having that experience, I wouldn't be a very good project leader. And that's the way that in our company, that's the way we work. We have managers and technical experts who have been doing these low-level jobs for quite some time and built up the experience. We don't bring in like managers who have managerial experience and nothing else.
I think Charlie raised a really good point there, actually, which is coding is basically problem solving. And it's something that people kind of aren't necessarily aware of when they first start looking into how things are done. And I think part of it is about how advanced our technology is these days, that actually if you have no experience with understanding programming or like formal logic understanding, logic gates and things, then you can see a mobile phone's operating system and you have no idea how you get from the beginning to where we are now, right? And I think it's very much kind of like learning all of the steps in that process. It doesn't require you to start at the beginning and think about how they started programming in the 80s and the 70s, like we're not using BBC micros anymore. But ultimately, I think it's interesting how effectively problem solving has always been at the heart of it. And one of the kind of most challenging aspects of coding can be keeping up with the technology that itself. The core understanding of solving a problem hasn't changed over the years. We're still trying to solve similar problems. It's just that the technologies that we're using to do them are so much more advanced than they were that we have to be more advanced. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting point.
Perfect. Thank you both. That's really great. And did both of you have much experience in coding before you joined your companies? Charlie, do you want to take the lead this time?
Yes, I was doing coding and showing my age here a bit. I was writing BASIC before I as my first language on my home computer. I've always been kind of interested in it. I've always been interested in computer games, so from the very young age I wanted to write my own. I wasn't very good at it, but then going up to university, I learned some more there. And but in my own spare time, I was writing stuff myself. And coming up to the company itself, what I did was I spent 10 years being a PhD student, and followed by being a researcher at university. During that time, I was doing hardware design, except I was doing it in a weird, narrow field called asynchronous logic, which didn't have any tools or support whatsoever from the commercial world. You couldn't pick up a CAD package which would compile things. So I had to recreate it myself, and using software. So by that point, I had a very interesting situation where I had 10 years of software development experience, primarily writing on my own and without a team around me. So going from that to a culture where you are working in a very big team, that's a very different way of working. So was not the right kind of software engineering experience, but was incredibly valuable for the job that I was doing.
Perfect. And how about you, Emily? Did you have much experience of coding before you joined Sky?
So I'm probably the opposite of Charlie. I don't want to highlight his age here. I'm very young, let's put it that way. But I sort of started, I've always been very good with computers. Like I was always the kid in the class that would be figuring out why Word has stopped responding on the teacher's computer, which is a very big jump to suddenly become sort of a computer programmer. But I was always interested in computing, and I'm very logical as a person. And so I was quite fascinated by it. And I decided to do computing for AS level. I didn't carry it forward to A2 because I was determined to study maths. And I wanted to focus on maths, and physics was better as an option to support that than computing was. So I just did it for AS level. And it was the first year that my school had ever run computing as an AS level. My teachers had no idea what they were doing. I became an honorary computing teacher because me and another guy in the class used to teach the rest of the class how to code based on things we'd learnt ourselves online. I did Code Academy courses, and one of the most helpful things I did was I decided to try and write Pokemon in Python as a text-based game, right? And I thought ultimately, like, how hard can it be, right? It turns out it's very hard, and it's really fun, and I really enjoyed it because you start thinking, you kind of start small and you go, well, I'm just going to start with the 3 Pokemon starters, and okay, each of those have different stats. We know that, and you give them sort of attributes, and you say, okay, well, now each of those has a certain set of stats attributed to it, and then they have different moves, so different ways they can fight, and so you give them different moves, and the different moves have different stats, and then you have to work out the combinations when you're pitting a certain Pokemon's move against another Pokemon with a set of stats, and obviously, like, you can't draw out a tree for every single one of those combinations, because if we're just doing 3 Pokemon, and each Pokemon has 4 moves, even let's reduce it to 2 moves and just have it as the default. And you have to figure out how each of those Pokemon's moves will affect each of the rival Pokemon based on their stats. And the fact that the moves can influence the stats, because the moves can lower defense stats or raise attack stats or the opposite way around. You can't draw that out and map that as a tree, right? So you kind of have to figure out how you're going to get your computers to do it, because that's the whole point of coding, right? Is that things that take us a really long time to do by hand, we give to a computer and it does it in seconds. And that's the whole point. It's utilizing technology to solve these problems. And so kind of I taught myself how to do this, like I sort of, read some tutorials online, I did some interactive tutorials, and then I kind of just built up this text game, which, was a very poor imitation of something that I loved. But that was kind of my first sort of understanding of how programming is used and why it's used. Because if you were to try and, because I tried thinking of it like a board game, and there was the Pokemon trading card game, and actually, like, the amount of work that goes into that is huge. But when you try and map it out and program it, it makes the problem, it gives you a different problem, and it makes the solution easier to understand but hard to implement. And it was, that was kind of my coding experience. I went off to university, did a maths degree, forgot that I could code. And then I applied for investment banking, realised I hated that as an opportunity after going for an interview. And I happened to get an email from my university about an insight day I was holding the next day. And I went along and went, oh yeah, I used to program. Oh, that was fun. I really enjoyed that. Wait, I could get paid to do that? Oh, great, let's do that. So yeah, that was kind of my foray into the world of coding.
Perfect, thank you, Emily. And you mentioned that you studied maths at university, Charlie, you studied computer engineering. It's quite different backgrounds. Would you say that then there's not one set background that you can come from to go into careers like software engineering?
I mean, I'd say no, definitely. I'm sure Charlie probably has a similar opinion. But I mean, one of the people I work with studied astrophysics at university. Another person I work with at Sky studied music. And she's working as a tester, not a test, so lots of coding happening there. But yeah, I think it's problem solving ultimately, which is what Charlie touched on earlier. But yeah, I'm sure you've got your own opinions as well, Charlie.
One of the people who has just joined recently had a master's degree in my team, and let me just give you an idea of how many CVs I looked through. Over the last 3 months, we have looked through about 400 CVs, and we have something called HireView, which is like an interactive interview type process, which you have pre-recorded video questions. I've gone through looking the other day about 150 of those. So it's a lot of people, and of those, basically, I picked 2, and one of them has a maths degree. The other one was halfway through doing automotive, something about aerodynamics about cars or something degree. Again, they were very interested in programming in general, and most of the reason that we hired them was from their personal projects. They had personal projects that they managed to learn these things, and they could use the skills that they learned from the courses in programming and to make those things better. Because if you want to make a car more aerodynamic, chances are you're going to be doing a lot of programming. If you're wanting to do any kind of maths, which is kind of the interesting kind of maths that we're doing nowadays, you're going to be doing a lot of Python and things like that. So there's no blocker there. It is actually very valuable if you're interested in computers in general, because that makes you a much better programmer. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but yes, if you're interested, you can you very, very much find it very easy.
Great, and I think what's really come through here that's really important is the extracurricular activities and the things you do in your own time. Emily, you mentioned Pokemon. I think that sounded absolutely fantastic. I love that. So were there any other kind of extracurricular activities that you guys did that helped you build your coding skills, or any that, Charlie, you've seen on CVs that you think, oh, that's a fantastic way for a student to start building their coding skills?
And I'm talking to all of the people here, you're going to find it probably the most difficult to get a job than any previous generation. Every single CV that we go through has had fantastic stuff that they've done in their own time. I can show you my CV if you like. It's got a big section there, which is just all the open source projects that I kind of contributed to, and it's got just listed the language that I was used on that project. I don't want to write JavaScript in my life, but I have that as an experience. I've done that, and I've contributed to projects with JavaScript. But and that shows that you are very, very amenable to doing stuff. Absolutely, I've contributed to many projects, and we expect people to. It's a bit of a joke that you wouldn't have somebody who comes in as a doctor and they're saying like, so in your spare time do you heal people in your spare time, do you perform surgeries in your spare time? But in computers, that's exactly what we are looking for, because we are kind of spoiled for choice for people. If you are interested in this, do pursue things in your own spare time and make Pokemon games, or get your Raspberry Pis out. And the other day, I was brewing some beer, and I wanted it to be perfect temperature, and I got a micro bit out and I strapped it to the side of the thing with a heater element, because it's something that I could do within like a couple of minutes, and I already have the skills. And I was thinking about sticking that on my CV, because it's just, you know, you can show you can do that, absolutely do that, demonstrate that you have the skills.
Yeah, just I have a similar. Actually, a few weeks ago, I made a soil moisture detector from my BBC microbit, because I happen to have a BBC microbit. And again, yeah, I wanted to know. I'm really bad at remembering to water my plants, so now it gives me a little sad face when the plants are watering, which, you know, is ultimately sort of applying these skills to the real world, which is what everyone wants to see, right? And it's okay. You're very likely, you know, if you have studied computer science at university, then you've learned a lot of skills that you'll be using, but you also haven't actually been software developing. You've been coding, which is perfectly useful, but you do need to get out there and you need to give it a go, whatever it is you're doing. I was very lucky that when I was at school, when I was 16, I heard about a non-profit that was helping teach children how to code. And it was basically, they would get Minecraft source files, and we'd show the kids how to modify Minecraft source file to create their own mods. You know, and you'd show them how to change like a line or two to make sure that, you know, to make chickens lay diamonds instead of eggs. And then you kind of get them involved with that, and they start doing things on their own and figuring out how things work. And so like I had a lot of experience from that, and that's all over my CV, because, you know, it was a chance not just for me to sort of learn more for myself, learn more coding, but also to share that knowledge, and that kind of gives you a lot of the soft skills as well. I think there's sort of the stereotype of coders being, you know, sort of a stereotypical antisocial person who sits in a darkened room all day, just hunched over a computer. And ultimately, you don't want people like that as software developers. You want people who can be part of a team. You want people who can contribute, and you want people who can stand up and have their own ideas and come up with solutions and debate these things, and share their knowledge. And it's not the kind of same stereotype that we're thinking of these days. You know, we want diverse teams, we want people from all kinds of sorts of backgrounds. So kind of projects where you get sort of a direct opportunity to work with other people, especially on, I mean, personal coding projects are really good about honing those specific skills. But yeah, finding open source Git repositories online, you know, raising bugs if you're still a little bit confused, and then kind of seeing how people fix those and contributing to that and being part of that community is incredibly helpful. And it helps foster those sort of softer skills and that understanding of working with other developers as well, as just learning how to code.
Absolutely. And we, please, if you have a CV that you're writing and it just says, I got a degree, put something else in. I will, you know, I have thrown so many CVs away because they just say, look, I've just got a degree, give us a job. And you are competing against people who are just much, much stronger than you. They have things, they've done things. And also, yeah, it's very important. These open source projects do teach you a lot. The first open source project I just wrote a patch for, I remember it because I just wrote it and it was correct, and they went rejected straight away. It's like, you're not following any of the formatting. You just completely made up your own syntax. You're not following the structure of the code. You are coding as if you are on your own. And that's exactly the opposite of what you should be doing. There's the old euphemism of what's worse, incorrect code or unreadable code. And the incorrect code is actually not that bad. I can fix it. If it's not readable, I can't fix that. And it's like it's a thing that I can't change after that. Even if it's correct, it's going to break eventually. It's going to need updating. That's rubbish. That shouldn't be allowed in. Incorrect code, I might actually accept that. I'll come back and fix it or whatever. That's much better. So, and that's something that you get taught by working in teams, and not just your university team projects. It has to be from people who don't care about accepting your submission just as a favor. You have to show that you can collaborate.
Yeah, I think as well it's really important to bear in mind that there will be times when you think you have done the best job you can and you have been staring at that code for 8 hours and you think it is perfect and polished, and someone comes along and just goes, nah, it's rubbish, and won't, and you don't always get feedback from that, especially when working on like anonymous open source projects online. Sometimes people just don't like what you're doing. It's really important to remind yourself that that's okay. You don't have to like what everyone else is doing either. If you're, you need to take breaks, you need to kind of get more perception from other people as well. And if you have done something which you believe is right and it's still been rejected, that's okay. No one's attacking you personally. It's their project that they're kind of letting you into. Just don't get disheartened by that. Just try again, ask for feedback, try and improve. Because everyone has their own ways of doing things. I worked with a guy who was incredibly strict about the structure of a pull request on GitHub, and not the actual code, but the actual description, the naming conventions, like branch naming conventions. And so even if you had done the work correctly, if you had used underscores instead of hyphens in your branch name, it was rejected. And it was one of those things that you just kind of have to go, well, actually, this is my project, so you can bugger off. Or this is your project, I'm coming into this, I will follow your conventions until I'm strong enough to have my own project where I can enforce my own personal conventions. And we can have a discussion about why your conventions, he may have had a very good reason for having those conventions. It may be that he was writing scripts to automate certain things and they needed to have hyphens rather than underscores. And if you have those discussions and talk to the people that you're collaborating with as well in whatever way you can, then that's great. But yeah, ultimately, it's very easy for a lot of developers to get sort of very emotionally tied to the work they're doing. And that's great for motivation. It's great to see that you're passionate, but ultimately as well, it's not you. When you're collaborating with other people, especially online, you're behind a screen. Don't take it personally, just keep trying.
Perfect, thank you. And so I want to carry on with the vein of advice for students interested in starting coding or developing coding independently, but I just wanted to circle back for a minute to ask kind of what opportunities there are to develop coding skills at your organisation, in your current role, or just more widely for graduates. Emily, do you mind going first for me?
Yeah, sure. So Sky's very good at kind of trying to keep up with the modern sort of technology industry. So they have graduate roles which specifically don't ask for CVs and applications because they don't care about your experience. They go straight on to assessing skills. And so the graduate roles really are focused on like what skills you have that you can develop, what strengths you have. But they also run a project called Get Into Tech, which is specifically for women. So women from any background, they sort of teach coding from the basics. They teach PHP. They do a project, and it ultimately allows women to transition into roles because there is still a big gender gap in the technology industry, and it is something that a lot of companies are trying to address right now. But also personally, at Sky, we get a lot of development time. So I get half a day a week to work on something personal to me, to learn a new technology, to go out of my way to try and focus on my own project, to collaborate with other people on their projects, and to spend some time, not necessarily work on a project that the company needs right now, but something which will ultimately make me a better coder and will improve my skills, so that I can contribute those back to the company. So yeah, I'm quite lucky that we get quite a lot of opportunities at Sky.
Great. And Charlie, how about you? Is there opportunities at your company to help people develop their coding skills?
Absolutely. ARM is one of those strange companies that we are solving things that haven't been solved. I have many colleagues or many friends who are doing, for example, website development for retail stores, things like that. And most of the time they're spending going to Stack Overflow, copying a snippet of code, putting it into their own code base. And it's tried and tested, voted, this is correct, everything's fine. Unfortunately, most of the time, most of the challenges that we have not been solved before. We are creating new instructions which have never been created before, new drivers that have never been done before. Everything is really, really new. We can't just bring in people and say, like, well, just do it, right? So that, you're a coder, you can do it. Obviously, there's a very, very long ramp up. So it's taken me many, many years to become a very, very proficient coder, and that is through constant collaboration with other people, learning from other people's work. And one of the things that we really kind of encourage is a specialization. Everybody around the place becomes an expert in an area, whether you are an expert in caches or device drivers for machine learning, accelerators, things like that. It makes you much, much more proficient than anybody else out there. Then when we do have more people who are bringing in and going to be working on things, we know exactly who are the experts in the area who can then pass on this knowledge and so on. It's actually, just going back to what Emily was saying, the Scrum, the Agile workflow, and so on. It's actually something that I find very, very horrible. I used to work on projects which were Scrum-based, and you were kind of considered like a resource. And every week I would turn up to work and I would dread it because there would be like some assigned tasks to me, and I would have no idea which part of the code base. And the code base we were working on was 250,000 lines long. And I would just be given these things and go, okay, have to learn it within a week. You have to learn that area of the code base, try to get that thing to work, not do a particularly good job because you're never going to see that code again. Chances are it's a large enough code base and there's enough engineers that you'll never see it again and you will never really care about it. The specialization thing allows you to work on the single piece over and over again. If you do it badly, you're going to be just making your life worse. So we know that people are going to be putting in better effort. They're going to be writing good code, something that they can be proud of, and something that they can show off to everybody else. Right now, the engineers that are in my company, they are being sought out by very aggressively, if they say, by companies like Huawei and otherwise I can't even say the names of, but because we are the world experts in those areas. So this kind of becoming an expert in an area really makes you very, very strong coder. And the coding is important, but actually knowing how to break down and how to turn into code, something that you know better than anybody else, that is the slightly more important aspect.
That's a very different approach to the way we have at Sky, Charlie. It's really interesting, actually, how different companies sort of deal with this. We are a very agile company, but we have a very different sort of set of skills that we're looking for ultimately. The work that we do, we have some innovation work that we're doing. So like Sky Labs is a project which is being set up, which is about innovation and proof of concept. And these kind of new ideas, but a lot of it is about building and maintaining systems to support ultimately what we do and to improve on that. And so a lot of this stuff is solutionized already, and implementing has its own challenges. But we work in an agile way because we have microservice architecture. And so we have small teams which work on, small services. So even though they may be working on different types of work each week, different tickets, they ultimately know the code base because it's the only code base that they ever look at. And it's a small enough service that we kind of avoid knowledge silos. So we avoid having a single person who only knows this, and a single person only knows that because of the way that our architecture is structured. And it's one thing to consider actually, is if you're looking at technology, there are so many different ways that technology companies function. There are so many different sort of types of team style, and it's really worth keeping in mind that if you move between software companies, if you're looking at different companies do different things, then they might be completely different from each other. And some of them you might love, and some of them you might hate, and that's okay. That's also part of like the process when you're trying to find the job for you. It's not just whether you're right for the company, but it's also whether the company and that atmosphere is right for you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you very much. So yeah, we're about halfway through now. So I wanted in the second half to really focus now on how to build coding skills. So I just wanted to ask both of you, somebody who's maybe just starting to begin, they've not explored coding at all, or maybe they've just started, what would be your one piece of advice for someone interested in starting to code?
Should I start? Linux. Very good one, very good point. I wish I had Linux when I grew up, but because basically you can have an entire operating system of all sorts of things, and then you can get source for any single one of them. Every single widget, every single thing, you can then say, I don't really like that. That's really annoying me. I can change it in some aspects to better suit me, and that's. You can see how they implemented it, why they implemented it, and then going through it. So getting yourself into the ability to just use the operating system, then moving on to being able to look at the source code and getting used to being able to just change the slightest bit and recompiling. Just to recompile something is a massive, massive task that is shouldn't be just taken for granted. It takes first time I had to compile GCC, and as a part of my university, that took me about a week to compile one program, even though the source code was available. So just getting that first step is fantastic progress. I thoroughly recommend it, and it gives you the opportunity to fix things. There's nothing worse than having a computer that you go like, okay, I can see what's going wrong, but I can't fix it. I can't even change it. I can't do anything about it. It gives you that ability.
Yeah, I think I would go for a different approach. I personally recommend there's lots of really helpful online coding tutorials. I used to use Codecademy a lot. They now have like a premium feature, so you have to pay for some of their stuff. And I'll be honest, when I was doing it, it was all free and it was great. But there is like a lot of free stuff on there. It's really helpful. If you're looking at more specific technologies, if you already have a bit of a background, Kata Code, they're quite good as well. And also, I know it seems silly, but don't overlook things like Scratch, don't overlook things like BBC MakeCode, like BBC Microbit. There's an excellent game for the Nintendo Switch. It might be available on things called Human Resource Machine as well. I don't know if anyone's played that. My boyfriend has it. He was showing me. He was like, "Oh, you do coding?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, like it's very much kind of like line by line solving problems without necessarily decoding syntax." I think it's very easy when you start to be very overwhelmed, because by the time you get to Charlie's level, which I am nowhere near, just to put that out, I'm definitely at the beginning of my journey here. But by the time you get to Charlie's level, it's all jargon, and it's kind of like when you're a kid and you watch TV shows, and on the back on the whiteboard there's like a load of maths and it looks really complicated. And then actually, like, you get a bit older and you realize that it was just like a really simple algebraic equation. It was like x over 5 equals 25 or something. And like as a kid, you're like, that's the most confusing thing I've ever seen. And then you like learn it and you're like, oh wait, like, yeah, once I know the background, it's actually okay. It's very much the same with coding, especially when you're hearing terms like continuous integration or deployment, and you've got Jenkins pipelines. You're hosting things in Kubernetes pods or Docker containers, and you hear all these words and you look at all these technologies and you think, God, there's no way that I'm ever going to understand how they all fit together. And you will. It turns out it's not nearly as confusing as it seems. You just have to kind of take it one step at a time. So try things out, you might decide, you might start doing some coding and actually you find it more interesting writing batch files, and you find it more interesting looking at more sort of low level type of work, in which case, look into deployments, look into code which is already written, but how you can package that, how you can deploy it. And also it's very easy to forget that when you start out, you don't even know how to write code, and not just in learning syntax, but like, well, do you write it in a Word document? Like where do you put it? There's no like button on my computer which just says click here to code now, like you have to learn about IDEs, you have to learn about command line. If you want to host projects, you need to learn about something called Git or source control, and it's all really confusing to start with, and it's very easy to get lost, and that's okay. Don't worry. I would say start simple if you're completely new to it. Look at just HTML. W3 schools are a great resource for when you need to learn bits of syntax here and there. Find an online code editor, or if you Google Code Sandbox, you can find sandboxes, so they can sort of compile things for you, and you can sort of see in real time the changes that you're making. And like once you've kind of got to grips with that, start looking into how to host things locally. Start looking into running servers, start looking into deployment, start looking into all of that. But kind of focus on one thing, and move forward step by step. Because it doesn't take you as long as you think it will, but it does sound very confusing to start with.
Perfect. And taking it back to the very start again, do either of you think there are certain programming languages that are the best to learn? Maybe there's one or two that you think go for that one, or even ARM or Sky in particular. Is there a programming language that's kind of top of the list? Oh, no, Charlie,
go on, Emily. Sorry, I did the first one, last time.
No, okay. Well, I mean, it all depends on exactly kind of what you think you'll be interested in. I don't think there's necessarily better languages than others. Well, that's a lie. Every developer you ever speak to will tell you that they hate one language vehemently. And I mean, like, really just despise it. But different languages use for different things. Python, I find, is pretty good to start with because it's very high level, and the syntax is written in such a way that you do kind of feel like it's just plain written English. It is kind of limited in some things, but there's also quite a few open source libraries. So if you want to do something, chances are it's been done before in Python, and you'll be able to find examples of that. So I like Python. I think it's a pretty good place to start. You can do quite a few different things with it. It's got a GUI package that you can add, so you can make visuals as well, which is nice. Kind of makes you feel like you're actually creating a kind of polished piece of work sometimes. But yeah, there's hundreds of languages, and it's impossible to kind of tell you which one is the best for beginners, because there isn't really. It's all personal preference. Charlie, what do you think?
Yeah, there's hundreds of languages. A couple of years ago now, I started a little website called dealferret.uk, and what it does is it finds whenever shops change prices, sometimes somebody would mistype something and they'll drop the decimal point or something like that, and it's like 100 times cheaper than it should be. So you can get very, very huge amounts of stuff for very, very cheap. But obviously I wrote it in PHP, JavaScript, and Python. Those are the languages I choose. All of them I used all of them at the same time because they have different applicabilities, and they were all necessary. So there is a language for everything. In fact, a single project will involve several different languages. What made that very easy is that I can pick up a language in no time. You showed me the other day, somebody gave me some code snippet. It was written in C#. I've never written C# in my life. I didn't think I had written C# in my life. And I edited it, and I was thinking like I was writing in Java, and I wasn't. It was C#, and I didn't even notice, because you just look around and you are writing from there. So the language isn't that important. It's your ability to hack it. As to the languages that we look for, for the application in ARM, C and C++. By far the most important languages that you will ever touch. And you might think, oh, okay, well, I can be much more expressive in Python or something else. Every year we try to have a goal of making your computers about 5% faster. And to get that 5% faster, it takes thousands of engineers and they're working night and day just to get that 5%. We do give coding challenges in order to spot whether you are a good programmer or not. And the way that we spot whether you're a good programmer or not is whether you have an understanding and appreciation of what is happening underneath your program. If I told you just a coding challenge, and you can think of these randomly, I'll give you like a string of digits, and I'll tell you which one is which of the digits from 0 to 10 doesn't appear in this string. And you'll probably go through and say, like, oh, for every digit, go through the string, doesn't appear in the thing. If it doesn't, then print it out. That'll be about 100 times less efficient than a good, clean approach of doing that. And if you have an appreciation for the way that caches work, you can make your programs run 10 times faster. People are killing themselves for 5%. You are probably wasting 10 times improvement. The same for appreciation for the way branch predictors work. Nowadays, they are incredibly important. And if your program does a lot of branches and a lot of pointless if conditionals, it's going to go really, really slowly. If you can show that, no matter what the position, I've had interviews with Google and with Amazon just to have a look, and you can show that you appreciate the hardware. They'll be very, very impressed. So those are the key areas. If you want to look impressive, appreciation for the hardware and programming in C and C++. Those are the ones that kind of differentiate people who are really, really good, strong, from just the mass of people who can program but are not really showing themselves off.
Yeah, I think that's a really that's a really great point as well about the difference between kind of companies which are looking more at low-level operations like ARM, which is very low level, and efficiency is highly important. And somewhere like Sky, where we do have some low-level work going on, but I work in sales and service, so we basically do lots of microservice architecture for making payments online on like the Now TV website and things. And for us, efficiency means less, because we're trying to solve solutions from a business perspective to gain users and to reduce the amount of churn on our website, and to keep people and to make processes smoother for people and our customers. And that doesn't necessarily mean efficiency, because we're talking, microseconds here, and a single microsecond in load time is incredibly important for an ARM processor, and it means very little to us running a website which is built in React. So it's again, something that's really important if you are looking for jobs with coding skills, to really focus on exactly the type of work that you want to be doing. Because there's very little C and C++ done at Sky. There is some done on server side, so maintaining our servers which our applications run on. But for example, one of our old legacy applications, I'm not sure if I can tell you this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. One of our old legacy applications which isn't really used anymore. I was looking through a test report to try and figure out exactly how some functionality worked. And there was an asynchronous call going on, and the tester who was writing the test, rather than actually write a full clean test to wait for the asynchronous reply and check that it was correct, just checked consistently up to a maximum of 300 retries. Now, I'm sure Charlie is quaking in his boots over there, because 300 retries is disgusting. It was hard-coded as a number, 300 retries. But that's because the way our company functions is that at the time, there was a problem. There was an incident, and it was causing customers to not be able to buy things. And so we said, well, how are we going to fix this in the shortest amount of time possible? We don't care about efficiency. We just need to make sure that customers can buy things and they're happy and they're not on the phone to us all the time. And so we had to put in a bit of a hack. We later took it out. It's thankfully not still in the code, which is the thing is why I can tell you. But yeah, different companies who do coding in different ways will have very different approaches. So yeah, something really well bearing in mind.
Great, thank you both. And I think we'll move on to some questions from the students listening now. Before we do, I just wanted to mention, for anyone interested in careers with IT employers, if they check out the Target Jobs It's Not Just for the Boys event, it's an event run by Target Jobs, and you can meet IT employers there, talk to recruiters, talk to graduate, senior IT professionals, and really get a feel for whether it might be the right career for you. But for now, let's ask some questions of Charlie and Emily. So the first question I've got from one of the students is, are candidates with humanities degrees wanting to work in tech and learning code still in with a chance of standing out against candidates with STEM backgrounds?
It'll be difficult. I'm going to be quite frank. It'll be difficult. You need projects. You need to. Basically, your biggest problem is going to be going through that CV sift stage, and you have to have projects and evidence that you have been doing some coding before. Unfortunately, unless we see that, we have so many applicants. You will be one of the 30% that we will just sift out as having not enough evidence. And then that's hard enough for computer science students, never mind from humanities. It's difficult. It's only possible. We have many people, but show what you can do, demonstrate.
Emily, what do you think?
From Sky's point of view, not at all. So Sky's whole graduate program revolves around the fact that they don't really care what the degree's in. They just care that you have a degree because it shows that you've been able to self-teach. And we don't ask for a CV at the application stage. We ask you what degree you're studying, as well as some basic information, but that's for information capture. Once you've done that application, everyone gets through to this kind of first stage, unless of course there is something like they don't sponsor work visas for the graduate employees. So that's kind of the only reason why your application might be rejected, or if they've had to cut off applications early, then it might be rejected. But apart from that, everyone gets through to that first stage, which is an online job skills simulation, effectively, to test people's ability, because I think, depending on the company, a lot of technology companies these days, a lot of more high-level technology companies, I suppose, are recognizing that actually teaching coding is actually pretty simple, but teaching strengths, teaching that innate problem solving, teaching that understanding, that team working ability, that's hard. So that's what we look for, because we want people who already have that sort of innate skill. We can teach coding syntax, we can teach you how to use Git, that's all fine. So from a Sky point of view, not a problem at all. We have a boot camp, a training boot camp, as soon as you start, if you're looking for a graduate role. So you'll be brought up to speed with everyone else as well.
And what I find interesting is that you require a degree at all. So I am literally just about to make an offer to somebody who doesn't have a degree, doesn't have A-levels or GCSEs, dropped out of school at 15 and didn't like school very much, dropped out at that point. In his own time, he has written a PlayStation 1 emulator. And they just needed to put down on the CV, and he's by far the strongest candidate out of his set. I don't care about degrees, as long as you can show that you are capable and you can have these personal projects. Absolutely.
That's cool. Rachel, can I just check? Are we talking to university students currently now, or is this a generic all people?
Yeah, it will mainly be towards university students with the Target Jobs Webinar.
Yeah, I wasn't told to mention this, but I'll mention it now briefly then. Sky doesn't just look for people with degrees. So we also have an apprentice scheme, which is open to absolutely anyone, especially school leavers. But a lot of our associate roles, we don't necessarily look for degrees. But our graduate roles specifically don't require CVs, which is why I mentioned that. But it's really interesting, Charlie, as well. Yeah, we, especially at Sky, that a big part of not wanting a specific degree is because we don't necessarily care about formal training. We can give formal training for the more technical aspects as required, but it's the strengths, that innate kind of problem-solving approach, which is really important. But yeah, that sounds like an excellent card that you've got there, Charlie.
Yeah, I hope so.
Perfect. I'm just going to whiz through a couple more questions. If we can maybe do some quick fire answers for me. So the next question is, what key coding related terms, languages and evidence appear on a good CV?
I can paste in my CV. It's not a perfect CV by any chance. Oh, you need to. Your first challenge is to URL encode it and put some percentage 20s in there. Do mention the languages. Do mention projects that you have. Make sure that have a look, but make sure that it's just your contribution that you've made to those.
Great. Emily, do you have anything that you would want to add to that?
No, because we don't accept CVs for applications for our graduate roles. We don't need anything.
Definitely do language. Mention the languages and personal projects. We will CV sift you out if you have just a degree and you're expecting a job. Unfortunately, the bar is high.
Perfect. Well, not perfect, but perfect answer.
Yeah.
And then next question is, being able to write code is one thing, but how do you make sure your communication with colleagues is effective in that sense?
In terms of specifically writing code, it's about learning conventions, learn standard conventions for the language that you're writing in, make sure you adhere to those conventions, use things like meaningful variable names, something that kind of a lot of beginners kind of trip up at is calling things var1, var2. Leave, if you're not writing for efficiency, then leave blank lines, if it's a language which doesn't care about white space. Separate things out into modules if that's the type of programming that you're doing. But yeah, stick to conventions which are already accepted for that project and that language, I'd say.
Yeah, as I said, you look around the thing that you're working, make sure that everything looks like the previous thing. If you look through and you can start guessing who wrote what, then that's bad practice. Make sure that it looks as if it could have been written by anybody within that team.
Great, and I think this will probably be my last question, so we'll try and make it a good one. What would be your golden tip for students learning to code?
So for me, actually solving problems that you are actually interested in and that you actually are passionate about. If you can show that, just like that guy, he just started writing a PlayStation emulator. He was really interested in it. He really liked games. He was really interested in it. And then the learning of the software practices and coding just came along hand in hand with that. So it was kind of pulled by it. So if you are tackling things that you are passionate about, everything else will come easy.
Yeah, definitely projects that you enjoy. It makes it so much easier to understand what you're doing. I would also say try and recognize your progress and your achievements. I know that on the graduate scheme, a lot of the women specifically had a sort of imposter syndrome, comparing themselves to other people around them, and people kind of were losing confidence. And so when they were trying to do things, they'd stop and go, "Oh, Emily, I'm not sure I understand this." And I'd go, "Okay, well, what do you think that is?" And they'd go, "Oh, it's, I think I should be doing this, 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 and this." And I'd be like, "Well, you should be. That's correct. So why are you asking me?" Just have a go, the worst thing that happens is you mess up and you revert back. That's all it is. I'd say, yeah, try and recognize your achievements, recognize your progress, and be proud of what you're doing. Everyone makes mistakes, everyone gets things wrong. No one knows every single piece of syntax for every single language. I'm sure even Charlie doesn't. We all Google things all the time. We all make mistakes, we all mess up. That's good. That means you're learning. If you're not making mistakes, you're not learning anything. So yeah, kind of just be confident with your attitude. Be confident with what you're doing, and yeah, keep learning.
Perfect. And I've just seen one that I think we'll be able to squeeze in. I've just seen the question come up that do jobs require a GitHub portfolio? And is that something you'd recommend putting on a CV or your LinkedIn profile?
So Sky doesn't, because we don't have the application stage. So I'll let Charlie answer that.
It helps. Certainly with the, especially on the borderline ones, if you have a really good, strong GitHub, and a lot of people, a lot of universities will encourage that anyway. I've seen universities which are London, Imperial, for example, everybody will have a GitHub because it's part of your course, your university courses, that the first thing you do is you create your own GitHub and you keep your code that you are doing there. Yes, although a lot of the ones that I look at are just empty. We did this one training thing at university and it doesn't really have anything on there. No, not necessarily, but it does help. As long as you have something interesting to put on there. Otherwise, you just wasted my time clicking.
So a GitHub profile, as long as it's filled out.
Yeah, put something interesting on there. Don't put it on your CV if it's got nothing in there.
Hopefully something to do with Pokemon or similar. I still love that idea. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to both of you for joining us this afternoon and telling us more about your own experiences and giving advice to the students. It's been really helpful. I'm sure the students agree with me. So thank you both, Charlie and Emily. That's it from us. This will be recorded and put on the TARGETjobs YouTube channel for anyone that wants to rewatch, because I'm sure you want to hear what they said again.
Thank you for having us, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.